And so we'll be starting in shortly. Okay, going live in a bit.
Yeah, I mean, you're the main source of my, what you call this?
Information.
Information as of the moment. Because I mean, I really love your take on things. So,
Yeah.
I mean, AI matters.
Sige, let's kick off. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to our episode 5, which is actually our 6th webinar on AI for lunch. This one will be a little dense compared to the norm because we're going to talk about a lot of uh, topics related. It's actually a mix of some talks that I've conducted recently. One is on journalism and the other one is on disinformation. And since I've spent the better part of this week talking to journalists about this topic, I thought it would be good to share to the public. Okay, let's start with an interesting term, no? Maximalist. Have you ever heard of the word maximalist? Kasi sanay tayo with minimalist, no? So, sige, maximalist. I found this in researching prompts for Midjourney, and if you prompt Midjourney maximalist something, it generates a photo related to that something, but jammed with a lot of information. So this is maximalist journalism. I showed this in a talk recently sa Philippine Communication Society. No? Here's another one. Yeah. Now, of course, given what we've been discussing for the past episodes, the first thing that I noticed is I never specified the gender naman, no? But here we are. 3 out of the 4 images generated about maximalist journalism are male. Again, make of that what you will. But I think this is like a continuing discussion on AI, fairness, bias, safety. And I'm happy I have here on the live Zoom si Miguel de Guzman, no, who I had a conversation with recently. We're actually going to air that conversation at some point about AI safety. No? Hi, Miguel. Sige, so today we're going to talk about journalism and disinformation. But before that, in case anyone doesn't know me yet, so my name is Doc Ligot. I'm an entrepreneur. My background is data analysis, but I've been involved with many projects. I've been practicing in the data field for, I would say, almost 25 years, give or take. And in AI, probably almost 10 years also. And the reason why I've done this series, as I keep saying, is I think there is a shortage of people who talk about AI generally, especially in the Philippines. So I wanted to be the one of the first to break that ice. We need more people to talk about AI. In fact, some people are already starting to post, academics, practitioners. Of course, opinions still vary, but I think this is good. So these talks are equally targeted to technical and non-technical audiences. I really want to spur the adoption of AI, and to do that, we need to break through a lot of the the confusion and alarmist claims. There's a lot of doom and gloom, rightfully so. In fact, this episode will have a lot of doom and gloom in it, but hopefully people understand kind of the perspective that the doom and gloom can be addressed, hopefully, if we understand what's the issue. This is also a high level view, so again, apologies. There's only so much we can cover in about an hour. But hopefully it's a thought starter for a lot. I provide references where I can, but just be aware that I also mix my personal views with this commentary. It's not 100% reporting lang. And of course, I welcome feedback on the series and prompts for future sessions. In fact, this was a prompt in a previous session. We finished episode 4 last week. Basically, all of the preliminaries na tapos na. But then some people were asking about disinformation and AI. So here we go. And I hope to do that in future sessions, where we talk about more topics. And hopefully with conversation na rin with other people. Okay, so this is now kind of a tradition for me. When we do registrations for these webinars, I ask a question. So the questions this time are, how will AI affect the quality of news? And do you trust AI news content? So on the how will AI affect the quality of news, the majority think it will worsen it. And I kind of understand where they're coming from. I sort of agree. In fact, one issue I'm watching very closely with interest right now is this expected collapse of online quality, content quality, because the fact that over time in the near future, more and more of online content will probably be AI generated, right? But at the same time, online content is the source for training future AI. So at some point, we'll hit a threshold where AI starts feeding on AI generated content, and that's a bad thing because that means these AI models operate on the basis of data distributions. And it's like the concept of averaging an average. An average of actual data changes the distribution of the average is confined to what the data it represents. But then if you average that, it's a completely different distribution altogether. So you carry that in a more complex sense. If the data that AI is trained on actually came from prior AI, it will just destroy the quality of content moving forward because it's not human generated. The basis is not human generated anymore. And then interestingly, although most people think it will worsen, when I ask, do you trust AI content? Majority are actually neutral. Okay, so they still think it's just a tool, which is good. It's refreshing, but it's interesting how they're pessimistic about the quality, but they're willing to be neutral about the AI itself. This is an interesting conundrum. By the way, this is just the registration for the webinar, so it's not by any means a statistically significant sample of the population. It's interesting when you cross the two questions. So the audience is rather split. No, you have 1/4 think really pessimistic. They think it will worsen the quality and they don't trust on AI content. Then you have people who are quite neutral. This is the majority of people, and it's roughly split between those who think it will neither worsen or improve and people who will worsen. And then the minorities are in the positive quadrants, no, where you have people who think quality actually will improve, which is interesting, and at the same time they trust AI news content because AI doesn't have biases, which is in a way inaccurate. AI doesn't have human it basically doesn't have any intrinsic biases, but the way they were encoded, the way they were trained is on biased data. So in a way they crystallize the bias if you think about it. Okay, so now let's get to the heart of the topic. So I'm going to divide the talk into basically 4 parts, 5 parts. I'll quickly review first the concept of generative AI because it's just worth reviewing so people don't get mixed up in definitions. And then I'll dive into what I was presenting earlier this week on how AI is being used already in journalism. It's nothing new, but maybe not recognized on a broad level. Then I'll jump into a discussion on disinformation broadly and how platforms enable it, because I think this is a very relevant discussion for understanding the role of AI. And then towards the end, I'll close with some examples of projects that I've done to give everyone ideas on how can data and AI be used to fight disinformation, and then moving forward, how do we collaborate? This is from past projects. And then, of course, we love to talk about the ethics. So it's worth reminding everyone about that as well. Okay, so again, briefly, discriminative and generative. Everyone's talking about generative AI, but AI has been in use, for a long time. But most of the use up until recently has been confined to discriminative approaches, which is basically interpreting data. So if you give a discriminative AI a picture of a cat, it will tell you if it's a cat, or a picture of a person will tell you it's not a cat. So that's been the bias or the thinking behind AI, at least the use of AI for some time. And it's based on traditional statistical modeling. No, many people were trained to get data sets, cleanse them, apply some sort of a mathematical algorithm, and then come up with results. Generative AI kind of flips this process around. Rather than just interpreting, because there is an interpretation happening, it gives you generation of new data. So you give a cat, it can create more cats, or you prompt it for a cat, it'll give you a cat. So that's really what's driven all of the interest in mainstream interest in AI today, also more of the mainstream peers. It's about, we're not used to a world where we generate data using AI. We're only used to AI making conclusions or interpretations or forecasts, but not exactly replicating the data we provided it, which is a completely different use case, right? And then a word on this point, I think one of the, I would say, a disservice that I think OpenAI did when they launched ChatGPT is comparing it, to a search engine, which it is not. No, it's not a search engine in the sense that it doesn't retrieve data from any database, because that's how search engines work. No, they have a massive database, all the links, descriptions, and then when you make a query, it matches it in a quick manner and fills out all the records that match. So ChatGPT and all of these large language models, even the image generation tools, they don't retrieve anything. They create new data based on patterns they remember and against the prompts which are embedded into their model. So the word generative describes that process. No? You have a prompt that was encoded into the model, and that the relevance of a particular word or phrase is connected to other data points which either assemble more words or assemble images. That's what's happening. So I would consider it more like a logic engine as opposed to a search engine. No, search engines just grab data from a database, while a logic engine reasons at a very, very simple level and assembles data from scratch. So the data it generates is statistically probable. Yung term na ginagamit nila, stochastic parrots. No? It's just parroting data. Pero yun na nga, parrots in a way exactly repeat what it heard. No? But here, it may not exactly repeat a phrase or a sentence that it memorized, but at least syntactically or structurally it's similar. But that says nothing about the factual content of the output. And that's, I think, where the problem now lies when it comes to journalism and disinformation. So let's dive into some practical uses of generative AI, specifically in journalism. And based on what I've seen so far, and I haven't really talked to a lot, I don't think media companies and journalism news desks are actually using generative AI in a kind of an organizational sense. They're not mandating the use of these tools. But I think they are indirectly benefiting from it via their staff and their freelancers who are probably using it already. So in a way, it's already there, but maybe not recognized. So I'll focus on 4 areas which are probably already happening on the ground based on the nature of the work of your average journalist and news desks. No? First is content creation. Actually, the outline of the first half of this slide deck was generated using ChatGPT because the organizer said, can only give you 15 minutes. You have to get all your points out. And I said, okay, I don't want to think too much. So I asked ChatGPT, give me a 10-point presentation, outline lang, the outline. I still had to create it myself. Of about generative AI and journalism that I can deliver in 15 minutes. And voila. No? So this ability to create ideas or create content, if you use it in a responsible manner, is a massive productivity boost for journalists, no? Who don't have the time to be speculating. Although to be fair, the really good and experienced journalists, they can already do this on the fly. But where this will impact is probably the younger journalists who are just entering the profession right now. They can instantly rely on and benefit from content creation using generative AI. One of the most compelling examples is, represented by Learning Studio AI, which I discussed in another episode. It's the creation of this, I would say this complex content, as if you will, no? Like using one prompt, Learning Studio AI can generate an entire training course. And I think this is one of the still, I would say, untapped potential of all of these large language models. It's not just a simple question and answer model. You can link prompts together, you can chain them and start coming up with really in-depth, complex content. Like another front where this is very useful is corporate planning, business strategy. You already have columns to fill up. No, what does the finance department do? What does the marketing department do? What does sales do? You can all link it to an existing prompt plus a certain situation, and then the chatbot will fill it up. Again, you don't necessarily take the output of the chatbot at face value, but it's a massive productivity save, no? Instead of spending days coming up with a strategy, you can do all of the preliminary sketching and skeleton in a day, and then spend the rest of the rest of the week refining it before you do your planning. Now, on the analysis and some summarization front, this is also a productivity save for media and journalists. No, I demonstrated this in another episode where we basically got an article, got the text, and I said, write me a 5-bullet summary of the text, and then there you go. I think by far this is one of the best uses of these chatbots, assimilating existing content and rewriting it in a simple manner to aid in education or to aid in understanding. So imagine if you're an editor, you don't have time to read all of these media articles, just summarize it and gives you the gist. And you can be more explicit about the summarization. So again, this is something I demonstrated in another episode where apart from getting text, like this is the Amazon worker walkout story, summarize this text, but using these bullets. So the 7 elements of story is quite useful. What's the plot? What's the tone, theme, setting, conflict, characters, point of view? And these are useful if you're creating new content to assimilate or understand very short form what all of these other articles are about. So now you're using AI to kind of augment your input, no, into your head. I did that exactly here, and the results are just short of amazing in terms of the time it saves. So rather than skimming through the article, which you can probably do quickly if you're an experienced editor, again, the people starting out in the industry might not have that speed, but with chatbot, they can learn to do that. Of course, in a similar manner, ChatGPT was it's still one of my favorite applications. No? Ito, you feed an actual PDF document and then you can interrogate the document or you can summarize the document. I heard from the journalists who heard about this say that this is going to be useful in mga certain beats, no, like in the legal beat, if you want to assimilate all these case proceedings, Supreme Court rulings, even legal legislation, which are often written in a very long manner legalistically. You can let the chatbot do the translation and give you the kind of the gist and the summary of it. No? Text is not the only place. Like, of course, image generation is big. I've been using various image generation tools. Crayon is one of my favorites because it's, number one, it's free. Of course, there's a pro version. You can generate art, drawings, photos, and you can specify whether you want it art lang, drawing lang, realistic photo, or free for all. No? So I found the quality of Crayon pretty good. One thing I like is this thing called scribble diffusion, no? Where you generate basically dynamic art from scratch through a scribble. No? So let me share that really quickly so that people appreciate just how quickly that is. No? So it's gonna type scribble diffusion. Yeah. And then it starts with a sketch. No? So I'm gonna clear that. So I'm gonna draw this. Okay. And then maybe a horizon. Okay, and then you don't have to be very good at the scribble sa totoo lang eh. You just want to, in a way, dictate kind of the general layout of the scene. So I'm doing a very bad job right now. Pero something like that, no? And then you can say, okay, this is a river flowing with trees lining it and a bright horizon ahead. Yan. Maybe gawa tayo ng mga hills dun sa horizon. Let's draw it here. Yan. Hills. Yan. So really ugly, no? With the bright horizon, hilly horizon red. Yan. And there you go. Click go. And then it will use your sketch as a, as a peg for coming up with, an artwork or a photo, depending on how it interprets the prompt. No? So I find that this helps get around a lot of the limitations of copyrighted, well, sorry to say it, copyrighted art, which is both a pain and ayan na, see, it basically generated the scene based on my sketch. So parang ganun, you just come up with some sort of scenario And depending on how good, this is where a pen mouse will probably be useful. And then yan na, no? So that's what I'm saying. Na, these generative AI tools are quite compelling in terms of their use cases, and images, is one part. Another one is 11 Labs. I think this is better if you guys heard it in the flesh, no? So again, let's go back to that window that I had. So 11 Labs is about dictation, no? Or basically, instead of getting a voice talent, you just let AI do it for you, no? Sige. So let's go to 11labs.com. Let me really share my screen. There we go. 11 Labs. Yan. You can try it for free. I actually have the paid version, no? So I'm gonna try it. You can select the voice settings, and you can say generative AI has benefits to journalism. Yeah, but we have to be careful about abusing it for disinformation. Yeah, it can be as simple as that, no? Then it will generate it. So
Generative AI has benefits to journalism, but we have to be careful about abusing it for disinformation.
yeah, galing, no? I don't know if you guys heard that, no? And really, the risk will be on voice talents, no? No, I can't see a way around it unless voice talents are able to basically give license to their voices. Because you can also use 11 Labs to clone a voice. And you can see how that's both a good and a bad thing. It's good if you can clone someone's voice for creative purposes, but you can imagine the disinformation opportunity there also. I won't demonstrate this anymore because I showed it one time, but you can generate background music and sounds based on AI also. This also, sorry to say, it helps you get around copyrighted music. So again, the question here will be on our composers or musicians. Will their work be supplanted by this AI generated work? And then I'm sure you've heard of that story of Drake, a Drake clone going on top of the Billboard charts, no, until the record companies requested it to be pulled down. So I talked about a website called There's an AI for That before. I just went there and said journalism, and it gave me some examples. So these are good ideas to see where these tools are headed as far as usage in journalism are concerned. I tried some of them. Some of them aren't really working well yet, but at least as an idea of where it could go. Like Generative Press generates articles completely from complete short form, medium form, long form article based on tweets. So this turns the production process around. Usually, somebody writes a long form article and somebody tweets it. Ngayon, ito baliktad. You get a tweet, it becomes a long form article. Again, news writer creates a press release. So similar to the summarization technique I showed earlier, it asks you for certain things: who are involved, what's happening, what's the situation, and it writes a press release for you. The LDR is about personalized news aggregation. So it's like RSS feeds basically, but using generative AI to do classification of content. No? And finally, on the lower right, you have I Doubt News. I tried it. It's not working completely yet, but I think this is the representative of existing efforts to try to use AI to fight disinformation. I think that's really one place where everyone should collaborate on. Okay, so to summarize this part, at least, the promise of generative AI for media is really productivity. So the time it takes for you to produce content gets cut in half, or you can generate more content during the same time. Content that can be customized and personalized, which is great if you're trying to spin a story from different angles. AI can immediately help there. Research and development also, you can use AI to review documents, review other articles quickly, and give you insights. So I think the promise here is really continuous creativity. If you're plugged in, all these systems helping you, you can really move a lot of needles in a very short span of time. Which now brings us kind of the second half. Obviously, these tools are great, they're useful, but then we also have to look at the opportunity for abuse. So I'll linger on these three images, which I'm sure many of you have seen. Biden in Divisoria, riots in France, Pope Francis in Fashion Week. Okay. Which of these three would you consider disinformation? Oh yeah, you have Miguel and Muhammad in the live in the live Zoom. Can you guys give me your idea? If you're gonna choose one, which one of them would be considered disinformation? Biden, number one, riots, number two, or Pope Francis, number three? What do you guys think? Put it in the chat. Because I think this is now where we are, where, by the way, all these images are fake, just to be clear. The question now is, which of them would you consider fake news? They were all generated probably using Midjourney. No? Biden in Divisoria was one of a series of photos that went viral on social media about a month ago, or more than a month ago, created by this graphic artist. He had Prince William, Putin having taho in Divisoria, so it made quite a stir. No? But we know that was not really, I mean, we knew these people would never be in Divisoria. Oh, I have answers here. So someone said Biden and Pope Francis. Muhammad said Biden and Divisoria. So we know Biden and Divisoria never happened. But would that be called disinformation? That's a question. The riots in France actually was a fake image. This image never happened. But the way it was positioned in Twitter is that here are scenes of the riots happening in France. That's fake news, no? And Pope Francis naman, wearing a coat which looks very realistic, never happened either. But depending on how it's argued, this could either be disinformation or satire. So this is the problem, It's on the one hand, it's about detecting if an image is fake or not. That's one half of the problem. But the other half for me is really the intent. If you just show pictures of Biden in Divisoria and maybe without any political commentary, baka that's satire. But when you show a picture of someone allegedly in the riots in France, which never happened, and if you're trying to convey some sort of emotion, people relieved, etc. So here, it's basically pro-police, if you think about it. That's disinformation. And then the Pope Francis in Fashion Week, again, depending on how you spin it, are you trying to make Pope Francis look like kind of a blasphemous, for patronizing a commercial event and wearing, certainly expensive looking clothes? Or is it still satire? That's the problem. So that's why I think, as a preface for this second half, I really want to remind everyone that more than any other, AI or not, technology tool to detect disinformation, one of the most important aspects for me is still screening for intent. Look at the content at face value. Ask yourself, why does this content exist? What is the tone being projected? And what's the caption? If the caption on the Pope Francis post was, Pope Francis secretly patronizes Fashion Week while preaching, on behalf of poverty, that's disinformation, because clearly you're trying to paint Pope Francis as a hypocrite. While in Biden and Divisoria, if he's just having fun, there's no slant or spin at all, then that's satire. Again, that's the question. And if you start regulating, fake news on the basis of just the evidence of fake or falsehood, we could get into trouble, because, you basically, a lot of satire occurs in various formats, impersonating people, etc. Okay, so that hopefully that was a good icebreaker. Now we need to shift our minds towards this information slightly. I want everyone to think about, go back in time to 2008. 2008 was a significant date, I think, because this was the year that Facebook's ad platform went online. It was announced in late 2007. Up until this point, our relationship and knowledge of Facebook was, it's a place to share photos, to reconnect with people, to poke your friends. But then, I don't know if people remember, back in the day, people didn't realize that there was a massive marketing potential, for these platforms, and that started in 2008. This image on the right shows you the permissions, for basically Facebook, the Facebook platform at that time, the Graph API, which shows you even back then just how pervasive the data gathering happening on Facebook was. No, another thing to think about as we get into this discussion is there are three related but overlapping terms. No, there's misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, and it's worth, again, this is a repeat of stuff you've probably seen before. It's just worth remembering the differences between the two. One axis is certainly whether the information being shared is true or false. So if you're misinformation and disinformation, that's certainly false. While malinformation is actually true information, oddly enough. No? The second axis is really the intent. That's why you have to screen for intent. If there was no intended harm, that's misinformation. But if there is an attempt to attack someone or mislead someone, or expose someone, that's disinformation and malinformation. So if it's false information with no intended harm, that's misinformation. If it's false information that's intended to harm or attack someone, that's disinformation. And if it's actually true information but intended to harm or harass someone, like doxing someone or revealing private info or tagging someone without their permission, that's malinformation. And we need to be mindful of that. Okay, so now that we have the preliminaries out of the way, I want to start going through some case studies. I'm sure people have heard of the Rohingya genocide in Myanmar. No? So the Rohingya were this ethnic minority in Myanmar, and they were which was reported in 2018, systematically targeted for genocide and hate by the Myanmar military using Facebook. And that's what made it hard to discover back in the day, because if you're using Facebook ads, only the people targeted by the ad will see the ad. And then second, the ads were done in Burmese, so the native tongue. So English language filters couldn't spot it until later they discovered it. So this is now the issue. The hate speech, genocide, discrimination existed way before the emergence of, the popular emergence of social media and AI. But these technologies now make it more possible. You can be efficient at this discrimination. This story on the right is a lynch mob triggered by WhatsApp. So it was also in 2018, oddly enough, these stories came out, where there was fake news about child kidnappers that circulated like virally, on WhatsApp. WhatsApp is the popular chat app in India. And then people started forming mobs to look for these child kidnappers and, make them pay for whatever imagined crimes. And the tragedy was some people were mistakenly identified and killed by these mobs. No? So this is what what needs to be done. We need to think about what is the impact of these platforms in heightening, the incidence of hate and exacerbating kind of the outcomes. If WhatsApp wasn't there, would these men have been misidentified and then later killed? Who knows, no? But certainly the presence of these platforms, I would argue, made these crimes possible. Some more examples. If you've heard of 8chan, so 8chan is a message board, parang 4chan, where people share all sorts of weird stuff. 8chan was particularly notorious because it was part of it. Well, number one, it became a breeding ground for ultra right wing hate speech that targeted certain people. And the shootings in Texas and Christchurch were actually linked to people who populated 8chan. So it's really distressful. The spoiler was 8chan was actually run out of the Philippines by a retired American living in Pampanga. So when the Interpol and the FBI started doing a manhunt for this guy, they found him in the Philippines. So imagine that. And then this thing on the right, rabbit holes. You know how, especially on TikTok now, but on YouTube, when you watch a video, there's a series of recommended videos. You can follow those recommendations to an absurd degree. Like if you just let YouTube keep playing, eventually, if you started out with a rather benign video, you end up watching all sorts of weird conspiracy stuff. And that's the problem with these two, is really this, you're kind of in this walled garden within these platforms. And if algorithms are either pushing content to you or you're limiting the content you consume, it can be really tough to be objective about basically reality. That's the unintended consequence of all of these technologies. And then now we have the phenomena of troll farms, no? Which are basically for-profit call center type operations, which either for political and maybe to a lesser extent commercial purpose, are used to. It's basically dark marketing. You either sow hate speech or you attack your competitor, or you spread disinformation, and people are attributing a lot of the results of elections to the preponderance of troll farms. So whenever you're getting canceled en masse for saying something political, or seeing someone getting canceled, it could be a troll farm at work. And then, okay, on the flip side, so these platforms are not naman 100% helpless. They have content moderation. But I think that one of the challenges we need to address now is these content moderation doesn't really work, and it's populated by humans as well. So this video on the right, and you have the link here on the bottom, is a story by Vice where they interviewed a content moderator online, and how difficult a job it is because you're exposed and bombarded with all of this really, really lurid stuff. Imagine all of the stuff on Facebook or on Twitter getting filtered down to your desk, and it's up to you now to make a call. That's bound to wreak havoc on your mental health. And this has actually been documented. Content moderation is a dangerous job. It has impacts on mental health. People have been known to commit suicide out of this job. And then on the same time, because it's kind of mostly human driven, the application of moderation policies is rather inconsistent and subjective. And you could also risk marginalizing people unnecessarily. There was recently a glitch on Twitter where people were accused of being a spammer, and people who weren't even posting anything were accused of that. So there's a problem also with false positives, no, that we need to address. And then the appeals process, usually in these platforms, is not transparent. That's the problem. So the answer should be automated content moderation. If you remember that grid I was saying, the uncertain and highly complex quadrant should be done by AI, but guided by humans. But I'll be one of the first to say the AI-driven content moderation is still kind of a work in progress. And that relates to also AI to detect fake news. There still needs to be more study put into the equation. So it's actually an open invitation for people to contribute. But right now, we can't 100% rely on AI to moderate content or to filter fake news. It's just too complex at the moment. Eventually, I'm sure someone will crack it, but we just have to be wary of it. And what we're really struggling with is big data. It's billions of users generating tens or hundreds of billions of content every day. Just too much content to moderate. And in addition to that, the algorithms themselves are also spreading that disinformation because it's optimizing for engagement, and that it's happening faster than human moderators can cope. So maybe to review a principle, I shared this in the ethics episode. No? If you look at any machine learning algorithm, generally speaking, they all learn from existing data. And that's the key. How do they learn? And how do they now project outwards, whether they're giving an interpretation or an insight or generating new data? Like in social media, for example, and this applies to all of the platforms, they're all implementing a variation of what I call filtering, which is a machine learning process. And again, we discussed this before, but just to review it, you have Sally as a user likes something like mojitos, and then based on their user data, AI can instantly rank similarity. So Susan, very similar to Sally. The outcome now is recommend what Sally likes to Susan. Straightforward enough. On the flip side, you have Sean, who may or may not be similar to Sally, but at least they like the same thing, like mojitos. So on the basis of that, you recommend Sally also likes Havaianas, recommend it to Sean. So one half is kind of data profiling, kind of similarity, and the other half is more preference or behavior. similarity. Straightforward, really a marketing marvel. It allows you to maximize engagement. But at the same time, at least by now, in hindsight, we can see that this is actually what's created the echo chambers online. So if you're on a social media platform, you only see exactly what the algorithm wants you to see, which is based on what you already like in the past. So the homogeneity of your feed is the outcome. You only see the same stuff again and again and again. It's very curated. And then if you think about it broadly enough, this results in massive polarization. Because other people are seeing something very different from what you're saying. If in the odd chance you get to interact, you'll have very opposing views. And now, I mean, I just reflected on this recently. This is now a direct outcome. It's not a bug, it's a feature of algorithms that attempt to segment populations, which is for marketing purposes. You want to be able to distinctly cluster people separately so that you can give them a distinct offer, no? But who knew that one of the best ways to segment people was hate speech pala, or disinformation? And one of the highest engagement is hate speech pala and disinformation. You couldn't predict that. In fact, that's already documented in a lot of social science research. No, they found that conservatives, the elderly, have a higher tendency to share false information. Of course, it needs to be explained why that would be the case. And just empirically looking at the data flow, I've seen this myself, having done similar analysis. The lies tend to spread faster than the truth because they titillate the audience, the emotions are there. I mean, we've had sensationalist press for a while, but this is sensationalism on steroids. So it's a platform problem, I would say, or a platforms play a big deal. But I would also then say we haven't really been that successful globally in making the platforms accountable. That's a problem that we need to talk about. There have been some mild successes. Facebook has been fined multiple times, but really drop in the bucket compared to the revenues they're making from advertising, for example. So one question I love posing in these fora is, are we already at a point where we want to consider social media, the internet, as a public utility? The same way we consider those applying for a franchise to become a telecommunications company, they need to occupy a certain spectrum. Or if you're a media company, you also have to register. If you want to operate social media in the Philippines, should you be registered also? Should you be regulated? Should you have a permit? Because these platforms, although they don't necessarily create the content that causes the discord and the confusion and the hate speech, their algorithms are promoting it and they are making money off it. So I think that for me is one of the strongest arguments of converting them and treating them as utilities. But I don't know if any countries got the guts to do so. And then okay, so let's look at now the opposite. It's not all doom and gloom. There are ways of fighting it. One approach is called inoculation. So if you treat fake news as a disease, and I'll show you some work we've done in this front, you can also in a way treat the cure as inoculation as one of the cures. You expose users intentionally to false information, but then explain why it's false. And research is showing that this now works better in informing, not just informing people, but making them resistant to future types of disinformation. Some people have started creating games. So these are two ones that I found. There have been many in the past. Spot the Troll and Harmony Square. These are ways of simulating basically situations involving fake news. And then after that, people connect the dots. So now when they see something online, it's already been pre-bunked. So people are now thinking, is this really true? Or should I look at more of the intent? Because most of the time when people consume content, it's just blindly just absorbing it. Now we need to make them active consumers of content so that they can be more wary. Now on this front, and I'm nearly done with my talk now. I just want to have a discussion after this. We've been doing a lot of research back in 2021, mostly, 2022, on infodemics, which is kind of the emerging proper term for a lot of this. So infodemics is an overload of info, often false or unverified, not necessarily false, but often, about a problem, especially a major crisis. So the easiest recent infodemic was COVID. Lots of information, people sharing papers right and left. efficacy, and of course, disinformation goes along with it. So it quickly spreads in the news, online, through social, and this information fuels fear and speculation, making the problem worse. So this has been the emerging definition coined by no less than the WHO, no? And it's being used already as the proper term for kind of the epidemic of fake news. So back in 2018, we joined this hackathon called Break the Fake, just as a way of testing my background. Before I got into social impact, I came from financial services, in banking, for example, and then I moved into IT. So my exposure to data science, AI has been strictly for profit. And as part of our transition back in 2019, we joined some hackathons, and one of the hackathons was Break the Fake. And to our surprise, we actually won that hackathon. The solution that we proposed was just basically a straightforward network mapping of fake news websites. At that time, we're not even talking about social media. And the way we were able to do it was, through a lot of pervasive data gathering. So we kind of turned the tables against fake news by being data driven ourselves, and then looking for similarities. And what we found was, even as early as 2019, there was a massive network of fake news sources, which were then being cited on social media as a method, no? So kasi we love sharing articles online. So if you create these bogus websites with bogus articles shared online via social, it looks very credible. And we found a lot of, this was before the election. This is before 2022. No? Interesting, no? We did a similar exercise for the Pacific Health Organization, looking at people who were sharing COVID misinformation. So doing some sort of contact tracing. And this is the result. We could identify who are the multiple carriers. So who are the accounts that are often sharing fake news about everything. And then we also found super spreaders or patient zero. Like in any epidemic, there's always that one patient who spread it to the majority of people. So these are traceable online. And these are some of the tools that we need to be deploying at scale. But the problem is, journalists and technologists don't work together in general. So while these tools might have been available for some time, these tools are at least three to 4 years old now. The usage has been quite low. Another thing, keeping with the theme of treating fake news as epidemics, one of the epidemic measures usually used is the real time reproductive number, the R, and you calculate that based on growth of cases, no? Based on a denominator. So we tried the same approach, but using social media posts. And what we were able to find is that you can actually segment different types of topics based on how reproductive or how viral they are. And that can be an excellent tool. Like this image on the right is comparing fake news about, or any news about Brazil's president, si Bolsonaro. And then the orange is basically any news about Brazil in general. And you can see the Bolsonaro strain really, really viral. And that's a way of isolating a particular topic and then studying it. Again, this is still in the realm of, analysis, machine learning. But I think reason why we did it is it can form part of a toolkit to further segment news. We also borrowed ideas from virology and chemistry, and looked at how fake news could evolve. So instead of looking at proteins, we were looking at words as the markers. And using existing methods, it is possible to start grouping similar strains of fake news together, or see how an existing strain starts mutating. Like, for example, in COVID, it started out as, oh, it's a bioweapon from China. And then later it's all about conspiracy to do vaccines. And then later it's all about Pfizer profiteering from vaccine production, by the same thread, by the same people, but the news changes. And this can be used as a peg to do future content moderation and creation. If you're able to now predict the extent of a mutation, you can arrest it. So parang totoong vaccines na. You're trying to look at inoculating it from a topic perspective. Which now brings us kind of to the close. No? So I talk a lot about data ethics. I still think there's a lot to go. Everyone talks about privacy and security, but there's a lot of other issues. I think the discussion on disinformation is central to the ethics. It's central to this point that data can be harmful, and it's also central to this point about data being hard to use. I want to leave you guys with some parang parting thoughts now before the Q&A on what we're seeing here is the classic evolution, I think, of society from very monolithic, expert driven humans, basically, to something more distributed and algorithmic driven. So, in that framework where I argued simple and complex, no? Pag simple, it's very straightforward. If it's an uncertain outcome, give it to a person, expert. If it's a simple and certain outcome, give it to AI to automate. But it's the complex half of that diagram that throws everyone off. So how do you deal with complex problems? For me, if it's still complex but straightforward, humans can take the lead, powered by AI. But then if it's an uncertain outcome and a very complex problem, I would argue that's now where you use generative AI to start mapping out possibilities and help guiding people towards outcomes. So just a few more thoughts about ethics. Data Ethics PH is one of the companies I run. We're really particular about the ethical use of data, but it also includes now the ethical use of AI. So issues like job replacement, automation, autonomy, of course, bias and safety are now central to this argument. But I mean, the reality is, right now we're still prisoners to a hype. So everyone is still interested in getting jobs as data scientists or data analysts or data engineers, but putting in the needed work, learning the technology, learning the math, it's really not there yet. And especially learning the ethics, it's really not everyone's interest. So hopefully these webinars are helping people kind of see the light, no, and argue for it. I also want to point out very recently, not so long ago, before Sam Altman and the Godfathers are now warning us about AI's dangers. They were 180 degrees in the opposite direction. Just a couple of years ago, where Elon Musk himself fired the ethical AI team from Twitter, and Dr. Timnit Gebru was also fired from Google. So I'm not exactly 100% sold that big tech is there to protect ethics. No, I'm not sure yet. Because their actions are kind of mixed. So the real onus is really on us, no, that we need to address this. So just to cap this latter part, summarize it. False content exacerbated by scale and algorithms. That's the problem. And the whole, every time you attend these fake news conferences, the focus is always on fact checking. And while that's important, we need a way of countering or using algorithms, because that's what makes these things go viral. Content moderation is also not reliable and has negative effects to people doing it. So how are we going to fix that? The algorithms themselves, if you drill down, they encourage engagement, but they don't really know if the engagement is based on truth or falsehoods. That's a problem. They don't necessarily care as long as you get the engagement. So that's a design issue, I think, that we need to address. And then social media platforms themselves have proven to be slippery. They're hard to regulate. But they could be treated as a public utility already, given their power. No? Finally, data can be used to fight disinformation, and we need to make sure data ethics is at the core. But unfortunately, the social media platforms are not prioritizing ethics. Okay, so I told you guys it was a dense presentation. So just to cap this off, if you want a copy of the material, please fill up our feedback form. I'll paste this also on the chat and also on Facebook. Bit.ly, AI for Lunch, journalism. It's case sensitive in case you get an error. And then here's my customary invitation to invite everyone to follow me on all the platforms, even TikTok. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube for video, and Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn for everything else. I also have a standing offer. If you need a free briefing in your company, 1 hour about AI, whether face-to-face or live, I'm happy to oblige just to keep spreading the word. And this is already the 6th of my webinars. So far, so good. Di pa ako napapagod. No? There will be more webinars to come. A lot of Yes, Mohammed. So if you want me to talk to your company, just drop me a line, no? Just to get the conversation going. Of course, where it will lead to can be another discussion. But I think what's keeping people from engaging is people think it needs to cost a lot. No, I don't think that should be the case. And then finally, again, I'm giving advance notice. We will be launching. This one is not free, but for companies who need help ideating and designing use cases for AI. One of my companies, Cyrolytics, is putting together a design thinking course with AI. And I'm just giving you guys advance notice. In case you're interested, you can email them at support@cyrolytics.com or you can approach me. And with that, let's jump into the Q&A. All right. So I'll just get a drink of water because I've been talking for almost an hour. But if you guys have any questions, please feel free to drop it in the chat. Just give me a second. Okay, I'm back. So I just dropped the link to the evaluation form. I'm going to do that on Facebook in a second. Just give me a second. Yeah. So for any of you want to give feedback or you want to get a copy of the slides, please fill up this form. Okay. Okay, so there's a question here on the live on the live Zoom audience, no? So this is from Muhammad. This is Muhammad, yeah. From Net25, AI is not only AI but now an AGI. Okay. Lahat ng ginagawa ng tao ay magagawa na ng AGI. Na paano na siyang tao? So what are your thoughts on this? Well, yeah, in theory, that's what AGI is, no? But far as I can tell, there is no AGI yet. All the AI that are currently in place is narrow AI, not general AI. So I would be careful about calling anything AGI yet. Although yun na nga, Chat GPT and these large language models have been very good at general purpose parang use cases, no? They're not confined to one area, but I don't think it's still AGI. It's pretty good narrow AI pa lang. Okay, here's another question. Si Miguel. The content moderation problem is a big one. On your view, how can that be addressed using an AI system? Again, I can't speak for the platforms themselves because I would assume, Jan LeCun works in Meta. It's probably one of the problems he's looking to solve. So I can imagine those people who are in the platforms working there already have some sort of an AI parang tool. Maybe one thing that we could do on top of that is use generative AI for education. In other words, generative AI can look at existing patterns of fake news and generate synthetic ones. No? And we can use that to teach people about what's the difference between this one that's the real GMA news and then the fake GMA news and how it's slant. I mean, just from the example earlier, the biggest difference talaga is intent. And people tend to zone out on intent. They just accept content, blindly. And that's the problem that we need to address. No? Yeah, but that's a good point. In fact, this should be kind of a hackathon, dapat, di ba, Miguel? We should do a hackathon on this and get people to contribute. That's how we got started with this. We joined the hackathon. And the idea behind that tool was called Troglodyte, actually. Pwede pa naman natin buhayin. The sad part was when we went around and shopped for support, none of the journalists were interested for some reasons. No? One group probably already had a tool, so didn't want to use ours. And in the other groups naman, they said, your tool is too advanced. We're not ready for that yet. So sabi ko, hindi naman kailangan kayo maging advanced. You just need to expose your data to this graph database, and then the rest will be done automatically. So they were also worried about exposing data. So ironically, it's a good attitude to have, no, to be protective of your data, but it's very hard from a research and development standpoint. So, what do you think,
Interesting.
Miguel?
I mean, interesting. It could have been what you call this explored pala, no? Before. Wow.
Correct. As early as 2019 yun, bro.
Wow.
Yeah.
It should have been. I mean, now we need that kind of like research to like explore. But yeah. So it could have been.
It's
Well,
not,
we
I
have
don't
to
think it's too
get
late.
up this.
Hindi
Yeah,
naman siya
of
too late.
course.
Kasi there are ongoing grants like the UN Democracy Fund, to name a few. Pero yun na nga, a grant is just a starter. We need to make it sustainable. Maybe it should be a community-led thing. Pero yun na nga there's a cost to booting it up sa simula, and you can't get around that. So that needs to kind of be discussed. No?
Oh, I do think na possible din talaga na it just needs some like a seeding prototyping thing.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct. Correct.
cool. Yeah, thank you sa answer.
Thanks, Miguel. I've had a few comments come in the registration. We're gonna read a few. So nakalagay dito. I think people should also be knowledgeable with the use of AI to detect if the content itself is AI-generated content. That's true. Actually, there are some emerging papers now that have started to dissect the outputs of Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, and they are able to now surface. Kasi the main, I mean, this should be another episode, no? But the main process of diffusion involves getting actual images and then making them diffused, basically adding noise, and then embedding the prompts and the labels into that noise, and then later denoising it back to the image. So that's how these image generation tools are able to seamlessly blend elements that are seemingly unrelated into one image. Now that diffusion process has a predictable pattern. So in one paper, I'll go look for it and share it. They were able to detect that diffusion pattern from the output, and that can be a good foolproof way of determining if this image was you know, what do you call this? Um, Good or bad. No? Okay. Another comment. Very difficult problem to curve/fix without the alignment solution in place. Yeah, that's a good point. Because, yeah, I mean, that this is one thing that Miguel and I are going to talk about. We're going to broadcast that conversation. The idea of alignment is a problem, and it's a classical problem. It's not that these systems were intentionally misaligned. It's just the nature of developing automated solutions. There is a natural misalignment in place that we need to identify and then refine further. For now, AI doesn't perform well in responding to disinformation. As a tool, it's only as good as how it was designed. Yep, that's correct. Some people would argue that the news generated from AI is better than research news. You know what? There is a minority who think this way based on the registration. They actually trust machines better. And I think that's a positive thing, as long as we're aware of what are the kind of the caveats, though. I can see Paula and Omar just joined us. I don't know if you were aware that we started an hour ago. No, I only announced that the other day. No, I had to start a little earlier because of scheduling constraints. But this thing is recorded anyway. You can catch what's happening. We talked about a lot of things. Here's another question from Muhammad. Can you see any role that AI can help in the coming barangay elections? There's a lot. No, content generation, education, and basically voter education is massive. That doesn't necessarily get into partisan politics. I think that's one problem with voter education initiatives, is they're often done on behalf of a candidate, which is ironic, or a political front. You need something that's non-partisan, you need something that's neutral, but then comprehensive. So you can say, hey, both sides have been guilty of using fake news in the past. So how should we handle that? But yeah, there's a lot. If you want, we can take it offline and discuss. I had some questions coming through registration. How can AI be used to fight against disinformation? Yeah, so on the analysis front is massive, like understanding networks. I'll jump back to that slide for the benefit of those who just joined us. I think the network analysis alone, where you can identify who was the super spreader, who was patient zero in spreading this particular type of disinformation, can be a massive help already. You can trace where it started. Or I think there's also a lot of opportunity for measuring mutations of fake news, because especially if you use troll farms, and I think that business will change also dramatically. So troll farms often do a lot of copy pasting. So if they're using similar phrases, similar words, that can be instantly spotted by AI. But now, nothing stops the troll farms themselves from using AI to generate variations of the text that they are writing, and that's going to make it harder to spot without AI. So I think moving forward, we really have to come to a point where we're really using AI tools, no, to spot this. Will AI halt disinformation? I don't think it can halt it per se, but what we want to do is to balance the odds, no, between those who would use it to generate this info and then those who would use it to stop or to fight disinformation. It's much like the internet, no, in general. What we actually want is something close to what Wikipedia is doing. It's a free encyclopedia, it's community driven, but it's also self-policing. So in other words, if somebody writes some falsehoods, like very recently I read in the news, somebody sanitized Senator Padilla's Wikipedia page, removing some of the cases that he was involved in before. And a good thing it was spotted also by the Wikipedia editors. They just restored it back. So you now rely on the integrity of these volunteers, and it surprisingly holds over time. No, we need to be mindful and what do you call this vigilant about these developments. Any more questions? So this is our outline today. We talked about generative AI, the use of AI in journalism, disinformation and platforms. Also talked about some projects we did on fighting disinformation and some ethics. No? So this is the only time we started early. Moving forward, it's going to be back to 12 o'clock. I just had to do it today a little earlier because of some scheduling constraints, but I felt it was too much of a loss to miss an episode. So for those who came in late, apologies if that was not communicated properly, but otherwise you can check the replay later. All right. So if there's nothing else, I think we can end it here. Thanks a lot for attending episode 5, which is actually the 6th webinar, and there'll be more to come. So I take all the suggestions seriously. So there will be more interesting topics to come. And please look forward to some broadcasts of the conversations I've had. So someone in the live Zoom is Miguel de Guzman. In case you didn't know, he's one of the few AI safety researchers I've met, who's also a local, but he's based out of the Philippines. So I'm looking forward to airing that conversation. And I also have another conversation with, of course, by now, the famous Dr. Ben Tihanki of LaSalle. We talked about the outcomes of the AI Summit. So please look forward to that. Yeah, in the meantime, catch me on YouTube as usual. And thank you very much. That's been episode 5. I'll catch you guys later.